And so in case you are going to suffer or pass out or something, I have chocolate. That's okay. I'm not really kidding because we have to do this. Now, my name is Vitaly, and I'm co-founder of Smasher Magazine, an online magazine for designers and developers. I'm sure that some of you might be familiar with it. Most of the time these days I do spend on the magazine, but also a lot of time these days is spent on consulting, mostly front-end, responsive design, sometimes UX, sometimes e-commerce checkout optimization. And so I spend a lot of time in companies, and I always enjoy spending time in companies because you can learn a lot of stuff from them and because they're pragmatic. By the way, I also speak very fast, so I apologize for that. And when you come in a company, they always have to figure things out fast, right? Because things have to be done by yesterday, which means that things are often quite dirty. So, oh, well, by the way, this is the magazine, but this is not what we're going to talk about today. When I'm talking about dirty, I mean dirty. Things you're going to see today, you will not be able to unsee. And I don't take any credit or responsibility of what happens next. But to make it slightly more interesting, we're going to do it in a very different way. It's the first time I'm doing it this way, so maybe it's going to be a total fail, or maybe not. So let's see. We're going to play a little game. So do you like, you know these little games when you have like a couple of minutes or maybe just a couple of seconds to find a solution? This is how I feel most of the time when I encounter, when I happen to be in a company. You really have to solve things fast, and you need to be relying on some sort of design patterns or something to kind of move forward, kind of push yourself forward. So this is why I thought about, what about doing something like responsive adventure? A game you'll never played before, and a game that's so dirty you will never be able to forget it. But of course, in order to play the game, we need to kind of understand what level we want to play on, right? So who feels like playing the easy level? Come on, this is no fun being easy. Who feels like medium? Who wants to play all the way hardcore? All right. It's just a video. It's not like a selection or whatever. But yeah, okay. So we're going to play the hardcore level. That's cool. And we're going to jump right into it. And we're going to start with something as basic and regular that most of you are, I guess, familiar with, like fluid type. For this, I have to jump out because it's going to be more fun this way. I'm sorry for the cameraman and everything. So now, of course, here's the question. Here's the problem, right? We want to solve one major problem. This is fluid type. Now, we want to have nice, beautiful typography that scales up and down independent of our media queries and independent of our responsive breakpoints. And we also want to have modular scale. If you're working with designers, most of the time they will want to have a perfect typographic scale. Now, how do we do it without media queries? Now, why without media queries? Because I really hate media queries. In fact, most of the stuff you're going to see will not contain any media queries. Because whenever I think about media queries, I think about if-then statement, right? Somebody's really excited about this, all right? So if we can avoid it, that's even better, right? So we want to have this fluidity. So how can we do this? Now, basically, this is how it goes. By the way, if you know how to build, you pose a challenge, if you know how to build it, shout, and I'm going to throw chocolate at you. Just because I can. Nobody's stopping you from this. So how would you do something like this? So you want one element, or let's say H2, H3, H whatever, to grow fluidly within a specific range, within a specific breakpoint range, right? And you want to do it without media queries. Now, I guess that most of you would think of something like, normally would play this little game.
The game begins in 3, 2, 1.
But I kind of overestimated the number of levels because we have like 20. So yeah, we will not do this like countdown. But you had an idea. Yes, so you could use VH unit or VW unit, but then the problem is, if it's unrestricted, the text can become very, very small or very, very large, right? So this is kind of a problem, but I think that you deserve a chocolate, by the way. So, you better close. So we can do one thing, which is really great. We can use calc. Now, calc, in fact, can help us in many, many scenarios. Now, this is what we could do, for example, right? We could say, let's set the font size on calc of 1M plus 1VW. So we have at least something like, it's pretty small at this point. 1M is the minimum, and then as we go, as we have more width in terms of the viewport width, we can actually grow with the font size. That's okay, that's cool. And we actually can achieve something like this, right? Where the type really beautifully grows and becomes smaller as we go. But what if we want a very specific growth, right? What if we wanted to choose a font size of 16 pixels at 400 pixels, right? And then transition slowly to 24 pixels at a resolution of 800 pixels of our container, let's say, right? Or like of width of our container. Usually we cannot do it without a breakpoint because we have this nice linear growth. And if you think about mathematics, and I like mathematics, this is what you are going to end up with, right? You don't want that all the time, all the way, right? You want something more granular like this. Because you want to grow in this specific range, right? From here to here in a very specific scale. And at the same time, different units that you have, H1, H2, H3, H4, and so on, should be growing kind of the same way, but not linear, but in specific way. So how can you achieve that? This is how you can do this, right? I don't expect you to come up with this formula on spot, but this is what you would do. So the intuition here is very simple. Now, first of all, we need the minimum. And the minimum font size is defined right here. We're using calc to define the font size, let's say on H2, on H1, H3, doesn't matter, right? At this point, we're defining the minimum. Here, we're defining the area for which we're going to transition. So it's a difference between the maximum screen size and the minimum screen size, right? Then here, 24 minus 16 is kind of the weight of the growth, if you like. So it's a difference between the maximum font size and the minimum font size. And what's left then at this point is to multiply this factor, which is constant all the time, with something variable. In this point, it is 100% of the viewport width minus 400 pixels, which is the minimum screen size. So it's the area which is left over which we can transition, right? And then you add 16 pixels to it, which is the minimum font size, and you're done. Right? And basically, this is quite straightforward. You just need to set up these 4 values, and you're pretty much done. And you can avoid, again, you can have a very beautiful fluid type without media queries altogether. And you can grow as you like with a fluid modular scale, which is really, really beautiful. Right? Now, this is one part of the story, and of course, we can use calc, and we should be using calc. And if you don't use calc yet, just add it because it's cool this way. I love calc. Calc is the best thing ever, like ever. So, but yeah, we also published an article which describes exactly this technique. It's really, really useful, so please feel free and read it and use it. But this is not only one part of the story, because whenever we're talking about one dimension, let's say font size, we always have to think about line height and line length. They're all connected. So, for example, if we have a big line height, huge line length, the line height should accommodate for it as well, so it should grow too. Now, how can we make it both work? I mean, obviously, this is a way too big line height. This is not cool enough. We also need the same thing for the line height. And especially, we need to kind of combine the font size growth with the line height growth without media queries. Can we do this? Yeah, it's the same story altogether, like all over again. We have a minimum line height over here, have a maximum line height over here, and here we should be transitioning between these 2 values within a specific breakpoint range. It's exactly the same story, and we're using exactly the same formula. Again, this is the minimum, this is the weight of how we're transitioning, this is the variable of the area which is left to transition, and this is the area which we actually have in our disposal, right? And you add this, and you have a beautiful line height, which is also dynamic and does not rely on media query. You can add media queries if you want to, but you don't have to, right? So it will kind of beautifully transition from 1.3 to 1.5 in the specified breakpoint range. If you want to learn more about this technique, there is CSS Locks article. There are a couple of articles on this, which explains everything in terms of the slope and where exactly this formula comes from. And also contains some examples that you can apply right away. So that's pretty cool, right? And there was also an article by Tim on this. And there was also it was amazing, because 2 days after the article was published, somebody came up with a tool that allows you to do this. Just set the values, and you're pretty much done, right? Pretty cool. This is going to be a recurring theme, so please get used to it. Right? All right, so this is clear. Now we know how to deal with type. That's pretty nice. What about the baseline? Vertical written in CSS. By the way, I fell once from an FITC stage in Amsterdam. Let's see how it goes this time. So we want to have a perfect baseline written, and you know how it is. Sometimes it's just annoying because you have to, have these offset values, and designer is really, really annoying because they want this perfection, and you just want to, get it done quickly. So how do you make it work? What would be the easiest way to implement the baseline written CSS for type and buttons? Because, for example, you might want the text to be sitting on the same line as, not the button itself, but the text to be sitting on the same line all the time. This is kind of a very usual problem to solve. How would we do this? Anybody?
The game begins in
It's too
3,
loud, I'm sorry.
2.
I can't stop it. Sorry? Using Flexbox. Interesting. Flexbox is always a good option. So you can always get a chocolate for Flexbox. I mean, that's just obvious. But I'm not sure how, but yeah, can you, yeah? I'm pretty good at this, by the way. Sorry? Yes, you can do that, but then you want the text. Okay, you can do this, for example, for buttons. That would be nice because you can have the baseline for align items, right? That's cool. Yeah, that actually might work. I didn't think about that. All right, anything else? One chocolate per round. That's enough. Right, so one of the ways of doing this, the easy way, would be to actually kind of try to reshape the problem statement slightly differently. Namely, we can say, okay, we cannot achieve this on the left side. It's kind of difficult, but we can achieve this by ensuring that the text sits on the line. How? So once we define a common line height value that's used for elements, normally, this is not how we normally would do it, right? We're defining a common line height that's used for all elements, including paddings and margins, and then we maybe take border within the equation, and then we try to align to that specific space. But we can also try to align to the baseline to make sure that it sits on the same grid line. The question is, how do we do this? Now, if we look again in here, the only thing we need to calculate is the offset for the text to be sitting on that line. This is the only thing we need to do, consistently for everything, right? Now, in order to do this, how can we do it? Well, we need to calculate this offset like this. So browsers, by default, center the cap height, or so-called the height of a capital letter above the baseline, between these grid lines that I just showed. So if we shift it by the half of the difference between line height and cap height, that should be just right. Right? So kind of calculating the half of the difference between the line height and the cap height, and we need to define this offset to put the text on the line. Right? And if we do this, well, with line height, it's easy. We can define line height, and that's it. But with the cap height, it will really depend on the typeface we're using. So we have to play a little bit in the browser to kind of push the text on the line. In order to do this, we can use a little mix-in. Here, we're defining the line height once. We're defining the font stack. Maybe we'll be having different sizes or different fonts. We're defining the font sizes and these cap heights, which have to be defined in the browser, right? By just trying different values and pushing things at the bottom. And then we're using this little mix-in here, where it's exactly line height minus cap height times font size divided by 2. We round it up, maybe. And in the end, we end up with exactly what we want. Come on, keep going. Now, one thing is to calculate the offset, and one thing is to calculate the line height. That's easy. But we also need to push the text on the line. In order to use it, well, we can combine positive and negative margins. So this is what we could do, right? We need to push it, and then we need to pull it back. Otherwise, this pushing in the beginning will be carried over to all the subsequent lines. So we don't want that. So we push to the bottom, and then we kind of push back with margin bottom, which is of the same value. Because if you look into collapsing and how it works, we know probably this, right? If you have two positive margins and subsequent elements, then the bigger one wins. If you have two negative ones, then the lower wins. And if you have one positive and one negative, then margins sum up. And that's exactly what we want. So we're defining the margin bottom being one value, the offset value, margin bottom, and margin top being the negative of it, and we're pretty much done as well, right? And as a result, you end up with this beautiful text sitting beautifully on the lines. Oh, not animated? Too bad. But it does sit on the line. Actually, it's supposed to be moving. Move. Now. All right, maybe next time. Okay. So, and there's also a really nice article, which is really like concise. It's really easy to do, right? So it's pretty cool. Okay, if you feel like, whatever, I don't want to be in this room anymore, here's a bonus level for you, because it's actually a bit more, it's easy, I think. But it's a little trick that you might find useful. You might be running into this problem quite all the time. You want to add a background to inline text for headings, but the text should be padded along both the left and right edge of each line. Something like this, right? You have an inline text, and you could use display block, but then it's very blocky. You could use inline block, but then still it's going to be quite blocky. So you kind of want it to be sitting nicely on top of the image, for example, and having some sort of a background, right? So if you just add padding to inline text, you're going to end up with padding over here and padding over here, but no padding across the left and right edges, right? That's a problem. How are we going to fix it? Do you understand the problem? All right. Sorry? All right, so what you could do is say, okay, I'm going to just set the text and I'm going to, put the padding on the paragraph on both sides. Yes, that would work. But that's not what I want to hear. So, okay, but that's cool. Well, you could always use pseudo elements for everything. Yeah, that's always a good idea. But there is a little trick that works even better. But you're not getting any chocolate from me. Yes, box shadow. And this is actually, and box decoration break, yes. So this is a very nice, really simple and nice technique how we can make it work. You just have to fix it. You just have to trick it. So if we set it on inline block, we might end up with something like this. Again, not what we want. But if we just put box shadow on the x-axis, we just set a zero spread box shadow on an inline element on the x-axis to pad each line, that's the trick. Right? Kind of like magic, just a bit better, right? And of course, the proper way of doing this would be to use box decoration break. And I think that the browser support is getting better, but we are, of course, not getting anywhere in the left upper corner. This is not going to happen, but yeah, this is the future, and this is what we should be using. Okay, here's another one. Ready? I have like 25 minutes. I have so much stuff to do. All right, so next. Hope you appreciate the sound effects. And you know how much time it took me to find them? So let's talk about bullets, because everybody likes bullets. Now, some simple things can be quite difficult. You're asked to implement a very particular style for items in an ordered list. Look carefully. How would you build it? Yes? You could use pseudo elements, but then how do you count here? I mean, you don't want to use a background image. CSS counters, beautiful. All right, exactly that. I don't know why CSS counters aren't used. I mean, in that case, you cannot use list style type. Why not? Well, because if you use list style type, you always end up with this fancy and horrible full stop. By the way, close. Well, all right. So you don't want this full stop. You want to have something custom, and you don't want to use a background image on this. It would be just annoying. So what would you do? Exactly CSS counters. I'm just skipping through the text. But in the end, you're defining a counter once, and then you just put it on HLI to increment the counter. This is exactly the problem we ran into for smashing, for the new redesign. Then you use before pseudo element in order to just output the counter's current value, and you're done as well. I have to jump all over this. Ah, yes, this is a nice article about counters. We have to jump this one because it's too easy for you. Don't worry, it's going to be fun. I mean, there must be some people here in the room who are not, front-end people. In that case, I have a bonus level just for, for designers, if you like. The problem is often maps, right? So when small distinct regions are to be displayed on a map, the map becomes barely usable. So think about a problem like this. Let me just zoom in, right? You have something like this, right? And you have regions on the left and on the right edge. I mean, go further. Thank you. If you have the regions like this, and you just get rescaled and scaled down, then in the end, you end up with areas which are totally unusable. You cannot click on them. You cannot tap on them. This data is just, you cannot use this map. So what would be a nicer way of doing this on smaller screens?
Use a hover action to expand it when you're
Yeah, you could use something like on tab. You can expand it. Maybe you can also have something like zooming experience, where you allow users to, here we go, That was easy. When you allow users to maybe zoom in a specific area, a specific region, and then increase the fidelity. One thing that you could also do is to say, I'm going to display a select drop-down by default. And then if I have space to display a map, I'm going to display a map. I mean, that select drop-down can be a bit fancier than that, right? But it's still quite useful. One more thing which is really cool, I think, is I'm wondering why it's not used a lot, is you can allow users to select several items at once and then specify their input by selecting or specifying exactly in the data list what exactly they want to choose, right? This could be applied to so many different scenarios, be it maps, be it data visualization, be it anything else. Especially when the input is really small, this could be really, really helpful, right? And one more thing you can do, of course, is to load map conditionally by saying, I'm going to display a static map on a small view, and a larger view, I'm going to progressively enhance it towards an actual iframe, which has fancy interactions and everything. Because you always have this experience, right? You start scrolling down on a page which contains a Google Map embed, right? And you're locked in this ocean of the iframe, and you can't leave it, right? So you can easily solve it with Google Maps API. That's not a problem. It's just a flag. But many websites don't use it. And you can load this map conditionally. You don't have to load it all the time. In fact, you can apply it to lightboxes as well, because this is literally a story of my life, right? You open a lightbox because you want to see an image bigger, but you end up seeing it smaller because you have controls on the left and on the right edge and maybe a frame around it. That's really annoying. Again, you can do the same thing. You can just load the next page conditionally if there is no space to display it, and actually display a lightbox if there is space to display it. Or in case of an image, link directly to that image on the small screen, and then change it dynamically into a lightbox on the large screen. Sometimes for visualization, you can also use stuff like this. You don't have to be geographically precise. You have to be tappable. That's the goal that you want to achieve. So you could say, well, I'm going to kind of abstract away from the actual geographical representation towards something that would have 44 times 44 pixel step areas on small screens, right? And this would work well. For example, here, it's exactly the same idea, just applied slightly differently, right? So this is a really nice idea. I mean, I see so many maps implemented in a poor way. So that's kind of sad. I really like this, actually. So one more thing, which is kind of fun, and it's also simple, broken images. By default, broken images look pretty bad, right? Is there any way to improve the experiences by changing the styling of that area, of the image area, if the images are actually broken? Yes? With order? Yeah, on our, yes, you could do something else, but you are the first, so, right? Yeah, you could just use a background, but that's not good enough. I mean, we can also, can we, yeah? Okay, so there is an extension we could use, but I mean, we're talking about good old simple CSS. I mean, here's the deal. So by default, broken images look really not good, namely like this, right? This is not nice. The thing is, if you look into the spec, the image element is a replaced element. That's an element whose appearance and dimensions are defined by an external resource. So pseudo elements typically shouldn't work with it. So if you try to apply image after or image before, it's not going to work, unless the image is broken. Because if the image is broken, then it kind of turns into a regular, I think, block element, I think. And then you can apply pretty much anything. So if the image is broken, you can create something like a huge pseudo element on top of it, like this, maybe, right? Position it absolutely, whatever you want to do with it, and then it's going to do just the trick. So this is going to be applied only if an image is broken or cannot be loaded for some reason, right? And you could do anything with it, both with before and with after. And browser support, yeah, well, but it's still better than nothing, right? And there's a nice article by Irene about exactly this technique. Okay. What else? Okay, this one. We kind of have to jump levels because we're... How much time do we have left? How much? 20 minutes or so. Okay. So the other thing is, Well, the outbreak. I'm very proud of the naming, by the way. Thank you very much for, yeah, whatever. So what if you want to use a full width element in a fixed width container? Happens to pretty much everybody in every project. For example, when you want some content to extend beyond the boundaries of the container, like this. So you have this image, but it would be very boring and very sad and very disappointing if you had to close this container, put in the image, and then reopen the container again. You don't want that. Yes? Sorry? Negative. You have to specify it. What exactly do you mean by that? Oh, you want to?
Well, the container, assuming that it has a fixed width, you would be able to say margin left and margin right minus however many.
All right, whatever. That's right. Yes. So yeah, that is right. So the thing is, if we want to do this, there is a little trick which we can apply all the time. So this is not what we want to do, right? This is like opening, kind of closing and reopening the container once we have the image in there. To release, and I'm very proud of the wording here, to release our child element from its container, we need to know how much space there is between the container edge and the viewport edge. You know that I like calc, and you should like calc as well, because what we can do is, say, well, the space by which we have to shift on the on the left and on the right is half the viewport width minus half the container width. Okay, why? So we have this container, right, for the content, and we want to move. This is the full 100% of the viewport, right? So if we want to move this image, so what we need to do is say, okay, I'm going to margin left the entire thing. Margin left is a new verb at this point. I'm going to margin left the entire image by calc of minus 50 VW, which is exactly this area, right? Plus 50%, which is of course related to the parent. And then you end up with exactly this area by which you're shifting it, right? And then you do it on the other edge as well, and you're pretty much done. Does it make sense? Right? And you can also, of course, when you're talking about VH and VW, you always end up with this, right? Well, why? Well, we have to think about the scroll bar as well, because the scroll bar, if you set an image being 100% VW, the scroll bar is not calculated. It's not it's like box sizing border box all over again. Okay, you didn't get the joke. I'm sorry, but it's the same thing, just extremely annoying. So because the scroll bar is not accounted for in that calculation. So what we need to do to fix it? Well, we just need to put overflow X hidden on it. And then it does the trick, right? Or if you really don't like calc, and I don't want to talk to you if you don't like calc, in that case, I don't know what this animation was. You can do the same thing without calc by just pushing left and right, and then using margin left and margin right at the same thing. But you also do need to use VW and VH for this. There is no way out, all right? Okay, next. Now, I have to jump to level 13 because it's so horrible, and I took so much time preparing it. But we need to go back to level 12 later, whether you want it or not. So, level 13. Now, this is really scary. This is really horror. It is really bad, really, really bad. So, email. We know how to deal with responsive email. It's no fun, and people who have to deal with responsive email are poor souls. So, how many of you have to deal with responsive emails a lot? Well, too many. We have to gather you and hug you later. That's really, really sad. So, oh heavens, you've been promoted to craft responsive emails. Now, many of you users use Gmail, Android, mail clients. How do you make emails bulletproof? And they have to be responsive, right? Without media queries, usually. I mean, Gmail now announced that they're going to support media queries, which is a great thing. They didn't say that an Android mail client is going to support it. And of course, you have Yahoo and so on. So we need fallback. How do we make it work? Okay. So how do we make it work? Did anybody have to build a responsive email for Gmail? Or you just gave up at this point, so whatever, it just gets something. Well, you can make everything work. It just depends on how ugly and dirty you want to go. Yes? Well, table is one thing. But you want to mimic this responsive behavior. Let's say 2 columns in large view and 1 column in small view. You can play with tables. You can also, but you don't have media queries. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Click here to view in the web browser.
click here to view in the web browser. You're not going to get my chocolate, because this does not solve a problem. You could also say, well, let's go plain text and call it a day and go for beers. Yeah, this is not how it works. Now, we are here to solve this problem. So imagine that. I actually worked with a guy who was so passionate about responsive email. He said, I can solve anything. So a client, a boss came to him and said, I want to, images are not displayed by default in many clients. So he said, boss said to him, well, make sure it works. I mean, I don't care how. Just make sure it works. Well, images are not displayed by default. What the hell can you do? He's like, whatever. I can just take an image, and for every pixel in an image, I can just encode it as 1 × 1 TD cell with a background color. And, I just use border collapse on it, and I put a link around it. It works in Outlook. Like, what the hell is going on? So you can actually do that. That's really bad. Don't do that. Right? But that's really, really horrible. Encoding every single pixel in your bitmap as 1 × 1 TD cell in your table. Have fun with that. It's going to be great. So this is what it feels like when you're working on responsive emails. It's like going back in time when things used to be different, I would say, right? And yes, usually this is the experience still you're getting, although many companies are experimenting in this space. So if you want to earn a lot of money, you should establish yourself as a professional, experienced, advanced, sophisticated, responsive HTML email designer for Gmail. Okay? Not anymore, but for clients, for mail clients. That's going to bring you a lot of success. So because we have to deal something like this, like because we have tables, we can color with background color, we can color the cells, so at least it displays something and it's not totally broken. And in fact, we can also use weird techniques like this in order to move from 2 columns to 1 column if we have media queries, right? So we can put table cells as display block, or even use table header group, footer group to reshuffle some elements. But this is horrible. This is just nightmare. Like, things like that are not what they are supposed to be used for at all. But people still do this, and of course they will be using this kind of class notation, just the attribute class notation, I think it's called, for Yahoo, because why not, right? So, because Yahoo doesn't understand classes otherwise. So that's good. So what can we do to make it better? Now, we can make it better if we are willing to go dirty, because we can use a nice combination of, again, of course, calc, width, min width, and max width. And I'm going to blow your heads up right now. So what happens if you want to have, let's say, let's make it simple. You want to have 2 columns on a large screen and 1 column on a small screen, right? What happens if you have in your container 400 pixels, potentially, right? But you set on a box, width being 320 pixels, min width being 480 pixels, and max width being 160 pixels. That's not funny. That's horrible. So who thinks that width is going to win, that your container is going to be 320 pixels? Who thinks that min width is going to win, so the container is going to be 480 pixels? Who thinks that max width is going to win, and so container is going to be 160 pixels? And who really doesn't care anymore at this point? Some people don't. Or maybe some people don't like to raise hands. Yeah, I get that. So the answer is, it depends. So, yeah. So if you read the specs, there are some really interesting facts. Read it as a evening lecture. It's great. It's really good. So if the width value is greater than the max width, then max width wins. Now we get that. We understand that makes sense because max width restrains the growth, right? However, if the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width wins. You have to read it again to understand it. If the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width wins. We can abuse it in so many different ways. Because what we can say is, I'm going to define in my box, because we want to build a 2-column layout that stacks and grows below 480 pixels, and 480 pixels is our breakpoint. So we cannot use media queries. So we're going to say min width is going to be 50%, max width is going to be 100%. Well, basically 2-column desktop version for the min width, basically 1-column mobile version for the max width, and the width is going to be a freaking calc of 480 pixels minus 100% times 480. Now, why the hell would you want to do that? Well, because 480 pixels is our breakpoint, 100% is the width of the parent, so our goal is to create a value which is bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width, so that either one of these properties is applied instead of the width. Okay, so here's an example for you. you can say, okay, I have a breakpoint 480 pixels. If I have a parent of 500 pixels, min width is going to be 250, max width is going to be 500, and the width is going to be a freaking minus 9,600 pixels, right? Now, we know from our experience that min width is going to restrict the growth and is going to win if it's bigger than max width or width. So here we go. We have a min width being the winner. So we have the box being 250 pixels. If we actually go below 480 pixels to 400 pixels, have a min width being 200 pixels, max width 400, with a freaking 38,400 pixels. And of course, because max width restrains the growth, we're going to have max width winning, and you have a 2-column layout in large screen and 1-column layout in small screen, and you're done. Right? Now, this is pretty disgusting, if you ask me, and I'm very happy that I'm not the one who came up with this technique, but poor responsive email developers who had to do this. And I have a credit in the end as well. But this works. This really works, even in Yahoo and Outlook and whatever, because why not? Of course it will be working, right? And it doesn't require any media queries. And as you can notice, I really don't like media queries, so this talk does not contain a single one of them. So what else can we do? Now, what about taking it further? What about an interactive live Twitter feed in your email? Yes?
Replacing the image, and every time it loads again, it'll seem like it's updated.
Oh, something like that, but you had a candy already. Somebody else wants one? Wants chocolate? Leah, do you want chocolate? Okay, go. I'm pretty good at this. So, but you had one already, so it's fair. So. Yeah, but you have to find a solution for the next one. So what we can do here is say, okay, we're going to load the HTML email, right? This image is going to reference an image on the server. That server is going to update an image every 2 seconds or so, just pulling the images, the tweets, and then creating an image. Then in our HTML email, we're going to use clip in order to clip the entire thing, and then use transition in order to transition. And you kind of have an almost real Twitter feed in your email. Okay, no excitement, all right, that's fine. Because you can do even more than that. I mean, you can really take it to the next level. And this is anything but good. I mean, this is seriously horrible. Oh, I have 10 minutes left, that's brilliant. I have so much time left. This is great. So we also know this fancy checkbox hack, right? This is disgusting, this is really, really bad, right? We should not use it, but we can use it for some reasons. So here's a label, here's an input, here's a div. Now, if we can't use JavaScript, which we can't because email, what we have to do is we are going to hide the input element, and then we're going to toggle a state for the div, for example, change the color, if that input is checked. Now, this input is hidden, but that label is going to be positioned strategically on the right place within our layout. So if you click on that label, you kind of toggle the state. Right? We can't have JavaScript, but we have this. So this is known as a checkbox hack, and you know this, I'm sure. We can take it to the next level by saying, what if we build something like this? We have a checkout experience, a shopping cart experience, right, where you have a few buttons you can click on in order to increase the price, in order to increment the value, number of items you're buying, and you can also see live updated price. You can also see images, like carousel of images, and you can also have a selection of shipping address and validation, everything in an email. I'm not kidding you. Okay, people feel disgusted. I understand that. Because the question is, there are a few really complicated things you have to keep in mind. First of all, you have this automatic price display, right? So whenever you select something, you have to update the price, and you have to do it without JavaScript. That's kind of hell of a task. Another thing is, well, how do you move between the different panes? Right? Different steps in the checkout, right? Yeah, well, here's the thing. You remember this, I'm sure. Punch cards from good old days. And each of these holes represents, altogether, these holes, right, represent a specific state. What if you move away from this towards something more, modern and interesting like this? Right? You could do that, why not? So here's the goal. Now, this is your HTML. So you're going to have a lot of input elements. You're going to have a lot of labels. Obviously, they're going to be generated for you. You don't want to build it on your own. You will die. I mean, I'm sure of it. But then what you can do is, based on what the user has clicked on, right, you can say check, 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 not check, check, check. Oh, then style div this way, right? And of course, you will not do it for every single increment or whatever. You just, if you increment, then it will do something else. But if you want to move between different parts of the of the checkout experience, so to say, in an email, this is what you will do. And so this would look more like this. So you would have something like 117 radio buttons and 44 checkboxes, and sorry for the typo here, and you have multi-page layout, and you can remove products, add products, edit quantity, color, and size. You can see live calculation, select payment, delivery, and so on. Even form validation, not even sure how it works, actually. And then fallback, and which is going to be just a regular email, right? So how do you actually show price? We know this by this point. You just define lots of counters. Lots of counters. So every single thing is like every single product has a counter on it. And then check, not check, well, then you increment it depending on the values, right? And then you can use a content property to display it, and you're done. Right? And of course, the best part about it, we need to think about support. So if email clients, the only thing we need to make it work is a support for checked, for just in sibling selector, and checked. So that's pretty cool. The problem is in email, often you have a file size limited to 102 kilobyte, otherwise email clients or email service won't accept it. I mean, without images, of course, just HTML, CSS. And in Gmail, CSS is limited to 12,000 characters. It might not sound like a big deal. If you do this kind of horror, this is a big deal, right? And this is the browser support for this technique, or the mail client support for this technique. In over 60% of the cases, you'll have a fully interactive experience, so you can do and run checkout fully in an email. In the other cases, of course, the fallback is just the first image or the first div being displayed, which is not that bad, right? In fact, this poor guy does exactly that for a living, right? And you're laughing, but if you think about it, like the most important thing in terms of marketing is, of course, email. People really care about email, marketing people, and in general. So if you want to increase sales, this is performance boost right here, right? Because you can do full checkout, just a second, full checkout in an email. The problem is how to generate a link that once clicked will actually generate a purchase. Well, you will have to use content property for this and probably a little bit of JavaScript. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But you can link users directly to using the content property. I'm not sure how exactly they do it. Maybe before pseudo, I'm sure. But yeah, yes?
I was just going to ask if you have a way to link it.
If I have what?
If you have a way to link it, but you just explained it.
Yeah, so I will have to look into this, but it does work. I mean, this is a working prototype. I just have to figure out how they did this stuff with the link. That's kind of helpful, kind of interesting. Okay, I have like full 5 minutes to go. I want to dedicate them to a bonus level. To a bonus level. Here we go. This is really important. This is good stuff. So, font loading, right? This is a big deal. This is very important. Now, here's a question for you. That's a bit too much, I'm sorry. Here's the question for you. So what if you want to really make sure that your landing page, which contains fancy web fonts, does load extremely fast? What would be the absolute best strategy for you to deliver fonts fast? Yes? Yes, so you can cache them in users' browser and local storage, but this is kind of getting outdated a little bit. I mean, we're doing it on Smashing still, but this is probably not what we should be doing. Local storage is a bit slow too. Yes? Where? I mean, encode them, yeah, but how do you want to load them, and where do you want to store them? All right. So the problem is that HTTP cache is not reliable. HTTP cache, okay, I don't have much time, but you can also come to me later. But the problem with HTTP cache is we found out that many users coming to Smashing Magazine, they actually, read not only Smashing Magazine, but many different magazines, right? So we ended up with users re-downloading our web fonts every 5 days or so. So they would see the switch from fallback font to web font all the time. That's really annoying. So I wanted to have something more persistent and resilient. We can use a cookie, but there is a better way. Yes? Oh, yes. I mean, we can also do all this normal, regular, good, old optimization, but now everybody is talking. Yes? Yes, that works too. I mean, there are so many options. Yes, you're getting a cookie. Oh, I'm so sorry. Leah, I'm so sorry. I should not be doing it ever again. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes? You could do what, sorry? In URL. Wow. Yeah, you could do that. I mean, you could do this critical CSS stuff. But this is kind of right. I'm kind of scared at this point. Please, yeah. All right, so I don't have more anymore. All right, so here's the thing, what you can do. Now, we tried many different things, and there are a few really interesting strategies that you could use. I'm going to overrun by like a couple of minutes. So normally when we embed web font, this is how it's going to look like for old browsers. If you want to support old Internet Explorer, you will have to do something like, you have to support EOT. Luckily, maybe we don't have to do it, and we can just serve, fallback font or web font to Internet Explorer, and instead say, okay, we're going to prioritize WoW 2, and then WoW, and then we're going to serve OTF for all the browsers, and specifically all the Androids, mostly. Now, that's okay. So what happens then is when a font family name is used in CSS, browsers match it against all font face rules, right? Then they download web font, and then they display content, right? So this is why if we actually look into CSS, and we kind of have the font face reference in our CSS, but the font itself, the font family is not used, then the fonts are not going to be requested. That's okay, that's cool. Normally, however, we would be using, maybe sometimes we have access to fonts, so we can put them on the server, and sometimes we'll be requesting them like this, right? And what we tended to do is to have this kind of quite verbose stack, where we're targeting not only web font and not only generic fallback fonts, but also everything in between, like iOS, Android, Microsoft. So users using these devices have a really nice experience as well. So this is what happens, right? HTML request, CSS request, then you get the fonts. And then if fonts, once DOM and CSS are constructed, if font face matches, the font will be required, right? And if fonts aren't cached yet, they'll be requested and downloaded and applied, which is why we end up with this, right? Where it just takes a while. And we talk about content first, offline first, mobile first. Well, while most users experience link underlines first. Because you come to the page and you see nothing but link underlines. And that's really annoying. This is not good. So we have this problem, actually two problems, or actually one. Void and FOUT. Void is a flash of invisible text, and FOUT is a flash of unstyled text. Invisible text means no content is displayed until the font becomes available. And the worst culprit here is Safari, because Safari is going to wait forever, because I have time, whatever. It's going to wait forever until web fonts are loaded, and if they're not loaded, it's just going to stay there hanging around, literally hanging around doing nothing. So that's pretty bad. FOUT is a better way. We show content right away in a fallback font first, and then we switch to web fonts. And most browsers will actually fall back to FOUT, meaning that after 3 seconds of timeout, they're going to jump to the fallback font, and then they're going to switch to web font. So this is all we know, right? The question is, how do we deal with it? Because this is not the best experience. I mean, after 3 seconds here in Chrome, we kind of fall back to the fallback font, right? If we're in a slow connection, right? And then eventually, this changes to something better, or using a web font, right? So what can we do? Now, here's a traditional view of this. This is what we tend to do most of the time. Instead of linking directly to the web font with link, we're going to use it, load web fonts using load CSS, which means we're going to load show the content in the fallback font first, right? And then we're going to load the rest, or like not the rest, the web font using load CSS asynchronously, right? That's okay, that's cool. We can easily group requests into one single repaint, so browsers actually get all these fonts together, and then they actually have a switch, and it happens only once. But you do have to choose a format to load, and somehow use a JavaScript loader to choose which format you want to support. Do you want WoW, or do you want WoW 2? So in this case, it's okay. This is something that we most of the time are using, but it also requires self-hosting, so you can't use it with Typekit, for example. All right, so what else can we do? Now we can use font loading API with a polyfill for it, and it's actually really cool. So we're defining a new font face object, and these are the fonts, and this is the weight, and this is the Unicode range we're going to use. And then in our JavaScript, we're going to have these events where we're saying fonts are loaded, or fonts are not loaded, or fonts have failed to load, right? And then based on that, we're going to decide what we're going to display. So if the font is loaded, we're going to load, Elena Regular at this point. And we can also mimic FOUT and void, right, with the font rendering CSS property, but it's not supported yet, at least not properly, so we can't really use it yet. But again, there is a polyfill we can use, which is pretty cool. So this is the browser support for font loading, which is actually pretty decent. And this is what we'll be using. This is an article highlighting exactly that technique to make sure that things are loaded with font load events. So and you can also use Font Face Observer for this. And this is what it looks like, right? If you want to use a font loading API with a polyfill, this is what you do. You load the font in the fallback font first, and then you have a toggle on the class HTML of HTML, right? So if the fonts are loaded or downloaded, then you kind of change the class, and then you, of course, have the styling in your CSS referring to these fonts. You can optimize for repeat views with session storage. I'll show an example in a second. You can also easily implement it with Typekit and everything. In fact, Web Font Loader, which is used by Typekit, uses exactly that technique. It kind of requires strict control of CSS, because if you have a single use of a web font family, right, somewhere, which is not scoped, it will trigger a void, which is not what you want, right? You want these fonts, web fonts, to be downloaded when you need them, right? And this is kind of where it's getting a bit tricky. So this is still pretty good, and this is what you end up with. So you have this flash of unstyled text with the class. Right here, you're loading the font, the main font, and then the bold, and then italic, and then bold italic, right? And then here you have different states. If fonts are loaded, then this is going to be the typeface. Otherwise, it's going to be sans serif or so. And here, you're using session storage, so you don't have the switch all the time. So you add this class font loaded if the font's already available. And then here, but first, you're displaying fallback font, and then you're downloading all of this asynchronously. And then when it's done, you actually add the class fonts loaded, and you're done. Right? This is the state of art today. We can do it slightly better with a flash of faux text, which is quite interesting. It's like faux, just with two-stage render, when we can split the web fonts into two groups, the Roman, like the main font, and the faux content. So at this point, you're going to load Roman first, and so the content is going to be displayed in the web font right away, but you will have italics or bold, which are going to be faux, right? Sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes it's okay for you as well. And again, you're doing the same story with session storage, and the problem is that font synthesis, right? Kind of can look pretty horrible at once. So you might not want that, but it's actually a pretty good option for great performance. This is the code you're going to use for it, where you're defining the Lato and Lato bold and italic and bold italic. And again, the fallback is your regular sans serif, for example, at this point. Here you have two stages. One is going to be font stage 1, just for regular, for Latin or Roman. And then the other one is going to be everything else. Again, the same story with classes, font stage 1 and font stage 2, right? And here, again, the same story. If you're done with the main, with the Roman, then you're adding font stage 1. And so you can define how you're going to display the font. And then the rest is going to come in font stage 2, okay? You can do it slightly better if you're doing, on top of this, also the critical CSS stuff applied to web fonts. With critical CSS, when we push the CSS, like critical above the fold CSS in the header of the page. Now, you can do the same with web fonts. We can subset a font, Latin font, let's say, to a minimum, A to Z, 0 to 9, and punctuation, right? You might end up duplicating it in a full Roman font because you want to cache it. And you might need to have, licensing issues because you need to subset the fonts. And that does work, right? And you end up with something like this, where you have a subset first, and then you have the regulars one, and you just load subsets as fast as you can. You can also use Unicode range in order to really subset it dynamically. And then again, you have the same story, font stage 1 and font stage 2, right? And font stage 1, you're loading everything with a subset. On stage 2, you load everything as is, which is pretty good. And everything else is pretty much the same, right? But the ultimate way of doing this is to say, well, what if we do this, right? So it's actually the same story. It just, instead of loading the font separately, we're going to just, sorry, almost finished. We're going to load the fonts base64 encoded. Almost there. Oh, damn it, 2 minutes late. Like this, right? So we're going to load it all base64 encoded at first, right? So the subset, this minimal subset, is coming right away. So you're going to display web fonts right away. It does block rendering, of course, but it comes right away, right? And then again, you have the irregular things, right? So this is pretty much the ultimate thing. Now, there is a nice article on this, which covers pretty much everything, which I highly recommend you to read, by Zach. And then it does improve performance significantly. So you are going to end up with really best results if you do these 2 scoped classes for critical WOFT. And just to finish off, I decided to beat it, and we did, actually, by saying, okay, we can improve it by introducing a new antonym, if you like. We're going to use critical FOF data URI with service workers, which I'm going to conveniently call CFOF-WDUASW. So instead of session storage, we're going to inline the web font in the markup and use service workers to store them, right? And it does work. I cannot show you the demo because we are running out of time. But if you do this, this is really, really great. It does work. Then the last thing we decided to do then is to kind of move away from this stack, which is simple, to something slightly more verbose, but useful for every platform you can use, you can think of. So this is what we ended up with for the system font stack. Right? Web font, iOS, Microsoft San Francisco, Android, Microsoft KDE, Ubuntu, GNOME. At this point, you are done. I don't think there is much more you can do with web fonts to really improve it. So at this point, I think we are finished here. So it's probably time to calculate your score. Let's see. Yes. And call it the end. I hope you enjoyed it.